This is a story about a teacher I had when I was in grade 3. I titled it, the title of it is Once I Got Into a Boat. She taught us a song called Once I Got Into a Boat, Such a Pretty, Pretty Boat, etc., etc. When I was in grade 3, I had the good fortune to have had a Miss Shanks for a teacher. She was very young, just out of high school, and we were her first school assignment. The school only had 13 students and it was all grades. I didn't know it then, but we were also her last teaching job. It turned out that she did not like teaching and she left the field after her 1 year with us. Her decision to leave the profession was perhaps to her betterment, but it was a great loss to the many children that might have had the same delightful experience that it was my good fortune to have enjoyed with her as my teacher. We were a small and graded school, and I think I can speak for all of us when I say that we all loved her. Years later, there was a television show called The Love Boat, and if I might be permitted to stretch a metaphor, I would like to recognize our year with her as our love boat experience. She was delightful. One time in class, Our time in class was always pleasant, and for the first time in my life, singing became part of the school curriculum. I presume that we did all that academic stuff that is supposed to be covered, but I didn't care at all about that. There are specters and school boards, etc., whose responsibility it is to see that such matters are taken care of. What I remember is that she made school a delight. Some 40 years later, the high school where I was a staff member held an anniversary reunion. The students from all the years past would show up. As a staff member, I was responsible for supervising activities in the school gymnasium. In order that visitors could identify me, I was wearing my son's basketball jersey that had his name, i.e. the family name, on the back. On into the evening, I heard a little old lady voice behind me ask, "You wouldn't be Donald van Alstine, would you?" Donald was my older brother that also attended school during Miss Shank's tenure. I turned around and recognized her immediately, even though we had not seen each other since 1944. "And you wouldn't be Miss Shanks, would you?" I asked. She said yes, she was, and I told her that I was the younger brother. She started to cry, and the only thing that I could think to do was to give her a hug. As I embraced her, a song that she had taught us to sing went through my mind. Once I got into a boat, such a pretty, pretty boat. I had some trouble myself to keep my emotions in control. This story is called Networking, and it's about two trips that my wife and I and my family took to see Canada. My wife was so happy at Fagan Lake that she didn't want to travel. She wanted to stay at Fagan Lake. But one summer, my 3 kids and my wife and I went west. And just before we left, my nephew showed up saying he wanted to go with us. And he had just bought a brand new Buick car. And I was using a half-ton truck, and 3 of us were going to be in front, and the other 2 were going to be sitting on a chair or a seat of some kind in the back of a half-ton. And we were driving a trailer behind that. So to have this nephew show up with his car was a blessing indeed. Young people searching for jobs are encouraged to use the technique of networking to increase their chances of success. Basically, what this means is to use friends, family, anybody who might have some means of helping you get hired. Sometimes you get real lucky. For instance, in 1976, my family and I took our first trip to Western Canada. My 20-year-old nephew decided to join us. not only for the chance to see some of this beautiful country, but he rather hoped he might get a job in the oil patch. While in Fort St. John, British Columbia, my nephew and I took a drive out east end of the prairie, east of that town where the oil rigs dotted the landscape by the dozens. Our plans were very vague. We thought that we might just drive into an oil site where somebody might talk to us and perhaps give us ideas about the job prospects and how we might contact a company that might be hiring. We drove past dozens of rigs, and I encouraged him to pick a likely-looking one. Finally, we just said, okay, that one, and pulled into an oil rig with a trailer in the yard some 100 yards off the highway. It was about 9 o'clock on a Sunday morning, and except for the trailer and one car beside it, the site was empty. The trailer was a living accommodation, so we decided to knock on the door and see what might transpire. We knocked. Silence. We waited a little while and knocked again. We felt that the car meant that somebody was probably inside if he wasn't passed out from too wild a Saturday night. We were turning away, having just about decided that there was no one home, when we heard some noises emanating from the trailer. The door opened and a tall, lanky hombre stuck his head out the door. He was not in the best of shape, showing evidence of a night of hard drinking, and he growled a "what do you want" kind of greeting. I explained our mission, and he just looked at us in a kind of stupor. I became somewhat apologetic, realizing that our simplistic plan was probably a bit stupid, and we were sorry to have bothered him. By this time he had come more fully awake, and he was aware, and he was probably a pretty good fellow, for he told us to wait a minute, and he would get more fully dressed. We turned back towards the car and waited. In no time, out he came, and he had warmed up in attitude. We chatted for a couple of minutes about his job and the oil business in general. He asked us where we were from, and rather than say that we were from Maberly, Ontario, which had a population of about 100 people, I said we hailed from the Ottawa region. "Oh, whereabouts in the Ottawa region?" he asked, as if he knew something about the area. I decided to be a little more specific and said we were from the Smith Falls area. "Really?" he said. "Whereabouts in that area?" "Well," I said, "it's not really the Smith Falls area, but near Perth." I was still convinced that there was no use in saying Maberly. "Perth," he said. "Wow, whereabouts in the Perth area?" I stayed the course. There was no use changing tactics now. "Well, actually, we come from a little village called Maberly, just west of Perth." "For God's sake," he said. "You're from Maberly? Do you know Gordon von Alstine?" "This is his son," I said. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "For God's sake," he said again. "I worked with Gordon von Alstine in the sawmill in Maberly back in 1947. "And you are his son," he said, looking at my nephew. My nephew was offered a job on the spot. It wasn't network in the usual sense, but it was just as effective.